Welcome to the Friday, December 7th edition of the Clemson Dubcast. The end of a kind of a weird week. You know, you go all through August and then all through the season, 13 games, just grinding. Well, we're not grinding. Football team's grinding. And then it just sort of drops off a cliff after the customary appearance in the ACC championship game. This is awards week. The staff is also hitting it hard in recruiting for that early signing period. And so for the team, for the players, it's a chance, at least the ones who aren't out gallivanting around the country getting a bunch of awards, a chance to decompress and recharge. Enjoyed hearing about Christian Wilkins telling reporters that to stay in shape, he has had to hit up the hotel fitness centers in the various cities he's been, I think including New York and Atlanta. But the team resumes official preparations for the semifinal showdown with Notre Dame on Wednesday, and we'll certainly be out there covering all that. Plenty of coverage at TigerIllustrated.com in the meantime, including the latest on some of Clemson's assistants. Jeff Scott, in particular, saying no thanks to Jeremy Pruitt of Tennessee, who inquired last week about Scott's interest in becoming the OC and running his own show in Knoxville. Really remarkable run Dabo Swinney's staff is on. Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott have been the co-coordinators here for 4 years. Of course, Jeff has been here since the beginning under Dabo in 2008 when Dabo made him receivers coach. Brent Venables wrapping up his 7th year as Clemson's defensive coordinator. One of, if not the best assistant in the college game. And indications right now, at least, are pointing to him being here for an 8th year and possibly well longer. What a remarkable run for this football program and for Dabo's assistant coaches. Title sponsor of the Clemson Dubcast, Parham Smith and Archenhold Law Firm in Greenville. Very happy to have them aboard. Couldn't do it without them. Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold, both Clemson grads, both huge fans. Forte of their firm is medical negligence. They represent patients and their family members in medical negligence actions. They also handle all sorts of other complex personal injury litigation. I can vouch for them. About 10 years ago, a family member had a pretty serious medical situation with one of the local hospitals. Went to Blake Smith, and he very quickly and authoritatively gave us some great advice, and we were very thankful for that. Parham Smith and Archenhold offers free consultations. Give them a call, 864-990-4581 or parhamlaw.com. Also sponsoring the Dubcast is the Abernathy Boutique Hotel, a short Trevor Lawrence throw from Death Valley. Man, it is a favorite for the ESPN folks who come into town, who stay there various times of the year. Also, man, it is booked up and packed to the gills for home football weekends. It has really caught on for people who want to come in and stay. Also, Taps Bar and Cafe, a really cool spot to go hang out during the week. If you want to grab a drink with some friends, some of you professors out there who want to wind down after work, laid-back alternative to some of the more boisterous college bars in downtown Clemson. So go check them out if you already haven't. Got some really good beers on tap, including my favorite, the Hugie Street IPA. So check them out online at theabernathy.com. Okay, today's guest, Bryan Driskell of the Notre Dame rival site. If you're like me, you have spent so much time this season focusing on Clemson and teams Clemson is playing or teams that Clemson might be playing that you don't really watch a whole lot of other games, or at least I haven't. Just watch Notre Dame in bits and pieces until this week when I've tried to start studying them a little bit, watch their season finale against Southern Cal, also their beatdown of Syracuse recently. So, what better way to learn about the Irish than to consult with an expert? Bryan actually is a former football player, former coach, And, man, he is – I think you will find also, as I did during the podcast, that he is really informed about Clemson, has paid a lot of attention to the Tigers, and that's impressive. I can't recall talking to an opposing beat writer / analyst who knows more about the opposing team than Bryan does Clemson. So hope y'all enjoy. Here we go. Okay, here with Bryan Driskell, a football analyst at Blue and Gold Illustrated, our rival's sister site. Bryan, thank you for being with us.
I appreciate you having me on. Ready to go. Talk some Notre Dame and Clemson.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, first of all, your Twitter bio says you're a former college wide receiver and quarterbacks coach. And so obviously that piques some curiosity there. Can you tell us your background a little bit?
Yeah, actually, when I got done playing college football, I got into coaching at the Division III and 1AA level, now the FCS level. Spent 7 years as a coach. Coached mostly receivers and quarterbacks, although I did coach running backs 1 year. Did that for 7 years. Was a recruiting coordinator for a few years, pass game coordinator, that kind of thing. But life took me in a different direction. Got out of that, and then was fortunate enough to get into this business, which was a ton of fun because I am around the game all the time. I get to watch football for a living, but I don't have to deal with the pressure of if the team loses, somebody's mad at me or my job's in jeopardy. So that's the real nice thing about doing this job. Just a lot of hours, hard work, but get to work from home more. And if they go 4-8 in 2016, I'm not getting fired.
I don't know, man. I've had plenty of instances where Clemson loses and fans are mad at me. But probably for something I said.
I don't care about fans being mad at me. I care about my bosses being mad at me. That's more what I'm concerned about.
Where did you play receiver?
I played at a division. I actually played quarterback in college. I played at a Division III school up in Maryland, Salisbury University. So not big time football, but I played high school football in Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. So I played my first. I like to joke the first pass I threw in high school actually got caught by Dre Bly. Dismissed the part about he played DB for the other team. Well, we talk about that. But, come from an area with a lot of talent. Just football is a game I've always loved and been around, and I'm very blessed to be able to do it for a career.
How long have you been with the Notre Dame site?
I've been with this site. This is my 4th season. So covered Notre Dame for a different site before, much smaller site. So now it's really it really has been a blessing. I know I've used that word before, but I grew up reading Blue and Gold Illustrated. We have a magazine that also goes with our website, but I grew up reading Blue and Gold Illustrated when I was a kid. And so now I get to write for that magazine, and my wife does photography for it, and just it's been a lot of fun. It really is.
Just curious, with your background having played football, what's your take on when you hear, whether it's a coach or a player, and they hear a piece of analysis that they don't like, or a question they don't like, they say the standard, "Oh, you've never played the game." What do you think of when you hear that? Is that legit?
No, I mean I think it's an individual case. I know people. I mean, look, turn on ESPN. There are people that played football and made millions of dollars doing it who don't know a thing when it comes to analyzing football. And there are guys that, were moderate players or just okay players or didn't play at all that know the game. I mean, look, I have a friend who covers basketball out west. She works for a TV station out west, and she never played football. She didn't play basketball. She's one of the smartest sports minds that I know. To me, it's an individual thing. I think it's an easy cop-out to say, "Oh, well, you didn't play, you don't understand." There's a lot of ways to have knowledge of something. Some of it can come from firsthand experience. Some of it comes from being on an outside looking in. I think also gives a unique perspective. I think that playing the game and coaching helped me do my job well. But I don't think you need to have experience having played the game to do it. And I know that it's easy for kids to say, you're not a coach, you didn't play, so how can you evaluate me? Well, number one, you shouldn't care what my evaluation says anyway, right? You should only care about what the schools that are offering you scholarships or not care. But, look, there's smart people I know that never played or weren't good players. And there's people that I know that, were really, really good football players that when they try to talk to me about the game of football, I smile and nod and thank them for their advice and then quickly dismiss whatever it is they just told me.
It's amazing. It still gets back to doing your homework, because you can have the most distinguished former coach or former player who's an analyst on TV or wherever, and if they don't do their homework, they just sound like an idiot, more than And on the other hand, you can have somebody who never stepped on a football field or strapped on a helmet. If they do their homework, they're doing a good job in general. So
I think if you take pride in the job you do and you work at it and you try to be better at your craft, you can do it. Now, some people have the chops maybe a little bit more than others, but I think anyone that's willing to work at if you have a passion for something and you work at it and you take pride in what you do and you study the people that are good at what you want to do, and you're always pushing yourself to be better, you can be very good at in this business, whether you play the game or not. And that's what I try to tell young people that say, hey, is this something that's worth getting into? Well, if you have a passion for it and you love the game and you want to study and be better and be the best you can be, go for it. Because it's very rewarding.
Okay, within the first 20 seconds of our conversation before I hit record, you mentioned the Smoking Pig, so I presume you were here 3 years ago for the monsoon game.
Yes.
What was that like?
It was one of the coolest experience I've ever been through. I mean, I've been to some covering Notre Dame really allows us to go to a lot of cool places. That's one of the cool things about being an independent is, they're playing new teams every year. In the last 6 years since 2012, they've played in Dublin, Ireland, Norman, Oklahoma, the LA Coliseum, Clemson, the Big House in Michigan back in 2013. It's such a fun thing to do, and you get to go to these cities like Clemson and experience, it's the outdoor press box, and the student section is right there, and to see them running down the hill. And look, I grew up a Notre Dame fan. My boss told people that on our site that when he hired me, so I don't pretend that I don't have an affinity for Notre Dame. But more than that, I love college football, and to experience something like that is something that you never forget. Now, the game didn't turn out the way Notre Dame fans wanted it to, but it was a great game, great atmosphere. I praised publicly the Clemson fans were first class. It was raining and pouring, and you wouldn't have known it from how many people were out tailgating. I mean, it was just a tremendous experience, and was really my first introduction into the Clemson program firsthand. And I've had a tremendous amount of respect for it really ever since.
Tiger Stadium awaits, and the Clemson Tigers take a very short but intense bus ride from the locker room on the west side around to the east, Mount Clemson and Howard's Rock. Some players very quiet, some rowdy. And that rock from Death Valley, California, brought here almost a half century ago and placed at the top of the hill. One of the most electric rituals in sports.
I think this is one of the more anticipated entries in the country. These fans just wait for this all week, for the Tigers to come running down that hill.
You will hear Tiger Rag. They will carefully descend this hill on a sloppy evening.
Use his legs for a touchdown.
Any play tackled in bounds is serious trouble, though.
Game's over if you're tackled in bounds.
Kaiser loops it for the end zone. Touchdown! Torrey Hunter Jr. with 7 seconds to play. The Irish are a 2-point conversion away from overtime.
Chris, you mentioned last year's Florida State Notre Dame game. How about this? How about this right here? Perfectly executed to open it up. Exactly the same situation, the same side of the field, but this time Will Fuller, give him credit. He looks into the quarterback instead of looking at the defensive back. Perfectly executed by Notre Dame. Ironic, a year later, the exact same corner of an end zone with a game on the line.
They still need 3 more yards to force OT. Kaiser rolls, runs into traffic, and comes up a yard short. Boulware, Watkins, and the Clemson defense rises up to hold off a furious Notre Dame rally.
Interesting call by Brian Kelly, relying on the feet and the legs of Kaiser. This is all about the defensive line of Clemson. Watch Dodd and watch Watkins work here, and then you have the safeties and linebackers come in and help out.
The Irish with a tough schedule, not necessarily out of it with a 2-point loss on the road.
Yeah.
You saw how emotional Dabo Sweeney was a moment ago. He's now with Heather.
Hey, hats off to Notre Dame. You know, we had them down. They fought back. That's what great teams do. Well coached. But, man, I'm just so proud of our team. You know, that's what it's all about. You know, it ain't always perfect. But what I told them tonight was, listen, we give you scholarships. We give you, stipends and meals and a place to live. We give you nice uniforms. I can't give you guts, and I can't give you heart. And tonight, hey, it was BYOG, bring your own guts. And they brought some guts and some heart, and they never quit till the last play. And thank you to the good Lord and my dad who was with me tonight. Just freaking play this play. Don't worry about our screw-ups. Play this play. Win this down. And, just happy they never quit. But again, great effort by Notre Dame. But let me just tell you, rain, sleet, or snow, Tiger Nation, they show, and they were here tonight. Great job. We're going to do the whip in 1989.
I've never been to South Bend for a game, and neither have plenty of my listeners. How is it different? How is a game at Death Valley different from at Notre Dame?
Well, Notre Dame is an institution, right? I mean, that's the thing that Georgia fans learned that last year. There was a lot of Georgia fans I've talked to that didn't think much of Notre Dame, thought Notre Dame fans were a little snobby and arrogant. Some of them are. I think every fan base has those. But then they came up here, and they experienced what Notre Dame is all about. And it's the history, it's the tradition, it's the buildings, it's the mystique, it's the Heisman trophies, the national championships, the Golden Dome, Touchdown Jesus, all those different things. And it's just a really humbling experience and a fun experience. What I loved about Clemson is it's just college football, man. It's a passion for the team and the players, and the food obviously was phenomenal being down there as well. But it was just to some of the fan bases I think can be very I don't know. I think you can root against the other team and have fun with it and be respectful with it and it be a fun environment. And that's what I got out of Clemson. There weren't people. I mean, there's always going to be, in 80,000 people, there's always going to be some people that are not representing your institution well. But my experience, a lot of Notre Dame fans' experience was lighthearted back and forth, just a good college experience. And you don't get that at a lot of places. And that's what made the Clemson experience, truthfully, one of my favorite experiences and something I've tweeted about before. I was recently not very pleasant to the Northwestern crowd for how they conducted themselves. And people asked me what were some of my favorite environments. And, Clemson was one of the first ones that popped in my head.
It's so weird thinking back to that game. It's just 3 years ago, but at that point, Clemson had yet to really break through. They were 3-0. They had won at Louisville in the third game, really close game. It was Deshaun Watson. He was a sophomore. His first, I guess, he had started the season as a full-time starter, and so it was like, even Clemson fans, I think, were like, "Yeah, we're hopeful, but man, this is Notre Dame." There was that sort of mystique that came with playing Notre Dame and sort of at least a little bit of a fear factor, I guess. But now it just seems as if so much has flipped, and largely because of what Clemson has done since. And I think even Notre Dame fans are like, wow, this is Clemson. Not traditionally speaking, but speaking of all the things Clemson has done in the last 3 years, is that the way it feels for Notre Dame fans, that they're going into this game looking up at Clemson in a pretty significant way?
Yeah, I mean, for the fans that are rational, yes. Of course, there are some fans that every team they play stinks, and they're going to beat them by 30. But for the rational fans, yeah, I think there's this mantra. No, we actually talked about that in our podcast at blueandgold.com earlier. We did ours on Thursday, and it was one of those conversations where you look at how Clemson in that short period of time, and it really started with the Orange Bowl victory over Ohio State. And there was that notion that, Clemson couldn't win the big game. They couldn't beat Florida State when it mattered. They couldn't win bowl games and all these different things. And then, Taj Boyd kind of got it started, but then it was that 2015, it was beating Notre Dame, right? Then you go and you beat Oklahoma, and then you take Alabama down to the wire. And ever since then, people have viewed Clemson as, wow, they're an elite program. And that's where Notre Dame is trying to get to. With Notre Dame, what you guys found out in 2015 is Notre Dame fans like to say, every game's our Super Bowl for us. And you guys experienced that in 2015 because it wasn't just a normal night home game. It was a normal night home game against Notre Dame and all that goes with it. Now, Notre Dame is kind of looking at Clemson that way. Hey, they're on the mountaintop. We're trying to get up there. How do we get there? Well, this is who you got to beat. There's really three teams that if you beat one of those three teams, you're on that mountaintop, and 1 and 2 are Alabama and Clemson. And I'd put Ohio State kind of third in that conversation because they do have a title recently. But if you want to consider yourself a powerhouse program, you have to beat one of those two teams. And not just almost beat them like Georgia. You have to beat them. And that's what how Notre Dame views this game, and Notre Dame fans view this game. Like, hey, it's been a long time since Notre Dame has been that program. You want to get back up there, you got to knock the big dog off the stick, and Clemson is one of those big dogs. I mean, they're the only team that's really been able to beat Alabama in recent seasons, or give them a game. And I mean, I think last year's Clemson game, so I was just impressed that Clemson made the playoffs last year with what they had to lose and replace in the season before. And it just goes to show the kind of program that Dabo Swinney's been building. When we talk about that today, it's one thing to ride a great player like Deshaun Watson to the playoffs and the championship. We've seen people do that. But to do it 3 years in a row with 3 different quarterbacks, that shows you that Clemson's not just a good team, they're an elite program. And we talk a lot about that here, that there's a difference between being an elite team, meaning you're good right now, and being an elite program, which means you just are good all the time. The expectations are championships all the time. That's what Clemson is, and that's what Notre Dame wants to get to.
It's interesting you mentioned how impressive Clemson's playoff run was last year. It kind of gets skewed, I think, in the eyes of Clemson fans, or it did in the moment, because in the summer of 2017, if you polled Clemson fans and said, okay, you're not only going to go back to the playoff this year after losing to Deshaun Watson, Mike Williams, Jordan Leggett, all those studs from the 16 team, but you're going to go in as the number 1 seed. I mean, they would have thrown a parade just over that alone. But then after they lose to Alabama, the way they lost in the semifinal, it felt like in a lot of corners in the Clemson fandom that it was a disappointment, and that you had to remind them, hey, do you remember what you lost from last year? And, to be able to get back to the playoff in a rebuilding year is a pretty amazing feat, as you recognized.
Well, I think they're kind of in that mode now. I mean, this is something I've tried to point out to Notre Dame fans. Like, like last year, Jake Fromm, we've seen a freshman quarterback step in and lead a team to the playoffs, right? We saw Jalen Hurts do it a couple years ago. We saw Jake Fromm do it last year. But the difference between this Clemson team and that Clemson team is, Jalen Hurts was surrounded by veterans everywhere. Jake Fromm last year was like, don't screw it up. You've got Sonny Michel. You've got Nick Chubb. You've got Isaiah Wynn. You've got Javon Wims. You got an elite veteran defense. Just don't screw it up. When you look at Trevor Lawrence, he's surrounded by dudes that aren't that much older than he is. And that's what I think has made what Clemson has done this year offensively so impressive, that there's a lot of guys if you look at the best players on your team on offense, Lawrence, ATN, T. Higgins. Those guys weren't on the championship team, which was just 2 years ago. So that's, to me, the sign of a healthy program, when you can lose all those kind of players, and then you can just you've got young kids because they bought into the culture of the program to say, hey, this is the expectation, and this is what we expect you to do. And then when you can go 12-2 and be disappointed, there are a lot of fan bases that would gladly trade places with what Clemson did last year. I know Notre Dame certainly would have, although I think there was some benefits to Notre Dame having finished their season with a win over LSU. But as far as 10-3 versus 12-2, especially when, like you said, when you look at where they are. But I think when I look at Clemson, I still think they've got better years ahead. I know they're going to lose some very talented players on defense this year, but when I put together their depth chart and look at their roster, you say, boy, this is a program in a really healthy place. And that's when Notre Dame is finally getting to, where you can lose a Quentin Nelson and a Mike McGlinchey and a Josh Adams and an Equanimity St. Brown and a Niles Morgan, and you're actually better the next year. And that's what's made this Notre Dame team a little different than some of the teams in the past. Even the 2015 team, that team was carried by 5 or 6 elite players, but 17, 18, 19, 20 players weren't as good as where they are now at 17, 18, 19, and 20, if that makes sense. There's no Will Fuller on this team. There's no Jalen Smith. But 1 to 25, this is definitely the best team that Notre Dame has had, and it's that depth that they've been able to build that teams like Clemson and Alabama have built the last 4 or 5 years.
All right, that 15 Irish team lost 2 more games, the last 2 games of the season, to Stanford and Ohio State in the bowl game, and then the bottom just absolutely fell out with a 4-8 season. First of all, what in the hell happened that year? And second of all, how close was Brian Kelly, in your mind, to losing his job?
Well, in my mind, he was very close. And I think that Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director at Notre Dame, has said a lot that he didn't consider firing Brian Kelly. And he said the reason why is after the season, Brian Kelly came in and said, everything's on the table. Had Brian Kelly kind of come in and said, hey, this is an anomaly, it's just a fluky season, we're going to be fine, I think he'd have been fired. But honestly, I was on a radio station shortly after they lost to USC, and I said at the time, this is going to be the best thing to ever happen to Brian Kelly, or it's going to be the beginning of the end of his career. And what it boiled down to was he willing to look inside and say, well, how did we get here? Was it because we didn't have players? No. Because there was about 5 or 6 first-round players on that 2016 team. When you look at, what's coming up and what was on that team, they had a second-round pick, a quarterback, in Deshaun Kaiser, who Clemson obviously had a chance to see firsthand. And then talented receivers, multiple first-round picks along the offensive line. They were a bad program. There was an unhealthy culture. There was in the program there was hey, I'm doing my thing and you're doing your thing. Brian Kelly, which is what happens to a lot of Notre Dame coaches when they get into the years 7, 8, 9, they become distracted with everything else that goes along with being a Notre Dame coach, which is flying all over the country, speaking to alums and speaking to money people and doing all these different things. And it can be a very, very distracting job. It's much more of a CEO job than most college coaches, to be honest with you. Even Ohio State and Alabama, as difficult as those are, Notre Dame is just unique, which is why the longest tenured coach, I think, is like 12, 13 years. That's it. And most guys are, Eric Parseghian burned out after 10. Lou Holtz burned out after 11, and it's just one of those things where it's a difficult gig. Brian Kelly had to do some soul searching, and he made some changes in the program that were needed, went much deeper than hiring new coordinators and changing the strength program. It was about accountability. It was about doing a better job instilling leadership. It was all those things, and they were losing their way in a lot of ways. And if not for that 4-8 season, I don't know how to make changes. Somebody asked me the other night in the show. They said, if Notre Dame goes 8-4 in 2016, do you think Brian Kelly makes all those changes? No, he'd have made 1 or 2, but he wouldn't have had the reason to say something's wrong. We've got to overhaul this thing, and as it's turned out, Notre Dame's gone 22-3 since, and certainly the moves he made have so far panned out.
Okay, specifically, what was the most important move? What was the catalyst in your mind, or maybe 1 or 2 things?
I think the biggest thing, number one, was hiring Matt Bayless to be a strength coach. Matt Bayless, a lot of people don't, I think, talk enough about the importance of the strength program in modern football. It's always been important, but today it's so much more important. And when you look at Notre Dame, for example, every year they're going to travel more than any other team in the country other than Hawaii. That's just, maybe. That's it. This past 5 games of this season, they were in San Diego one week, Chicago the next, and they were at home against Florida State, then they're in New York City, and then they're back out to L.A. And you're playing good football teams. And to have the kind of stamina and strength and mental toughness to withstand that kind of schedule when you're playing, everybody talks about Notre Dame doesn't have the 13th game. Well, Clemson and Alabama needed that 13th game to match how many FBS teams Notre Dame had played because they don't play FCS teams, right? And so, I tell people that say that, well, when Notre Dame was playing Michigan, Clemson was playing Furman. So they had their week off when Notre Dame was playing. When Alabama was playing the Citadel, Notre Dame was in Yankee Stadium playing number 12 Syracuse. So that takes a lot, and I think that Notre Dame a lot of the times was not winning in the trenches when it mattered, and that was late in the game. And if you go back and look at that 2016 season, Notre Dame lost 8 games. They were tied or led in the fourth quarter of 6 of those games. Mm. And so they were beating Virginia Tech 24-7 and lost. They were up on Duke 14-0 and lost. And it was just one of those things where they were up on Texas in the second half, double digits, and lost because they just didn't have the mental toughness, the physical toughness to finish. And so the coordinator moves were huge. Kelly is around the team more now, which has been important. But that to me is the foundation of where it all started. Was hiring Matt Bayless to be a strength coach. I think that has instilled a toughness in this team that honestly it lacked. Even in 2015 when they were a very athletic team. I mean, you saw it. That Notre Dame team was as athletic as anybody that Clemson played that year. When you look at Will Fuller, Jalen Smith, guys like that. But they didn't have the toughness. And that's where Clemson beat them that day. Clemson beat them in the trenches. Because as we saw in the second half, Clemson had a hard time running with Notre Dame's speed on offense. But where they won the game is they were tougher. And that should never happen at Notre Dame. And that's one thing that Brian Kelly's worked to correct.
He hired Chip Long as the offensive coordinator, I guess, after the 16 season. What's the how is that? What's the division of power? I guess you could say as Kelly and Long work that offense.
It's Chip Long's show.
Okay.
And Brian Kelly has more than he's ever taken. Has taken more of a backseat role as a coach. He's now finally a head coach. Whereas before he would always be very involved in the offense. Even when other people are calling plays, you could see him constantly involved. Now you'll see during offensive series, and he's locked in, but he's not talking. He's watching. He's giving it over to Chip, and that was part of the thing. And, it's part of the reason Chip Long turned down Alabama last year when Alabama came after Brian Dabble left for the NFL. And because Chip Long's an Alabama native, he had done a great job with Notre Dame's team last year. And they came calling, and he said, look, I like it here. And one of the things that he and I chatted about was, Coach Kelly lets me do my thing. He lets us coach, and he does the same thing with the defense. Now, he's there to talk to, and he's a very bright offensive mind as well. That's how Brian Kelly made his bones as a coach, as an offensive mind. So it's great to have that resource, but this is Chip's show. And that allows Chip Long to have the freedom to, put in a game plan that fits his personality. It allows him to call a game, and he's an excellent chess player. He really is. And if you look at some of the coordinators he's had to go toe-to-toe against the last couple of years and had success against, it's really been impressive. And obviously like Pat Narduzzi, who doesn't have some of the horses, Don Brown at Michigan, Clancy Pendergast at USC, Manny Diaz at Miami last year, who did have some success against him, David Rand at LSU. It's been a lot of fun to watch him really go toe-to-toe, because what has made this team better, look, I talked to a friend of mine in the coaching business. He's an ACC coach. And he said the biggest difference between Notre Dame now and Notre Dame a few years ago is this team is coached so much better. And that's noticeable. And they make better adjustments. Now, it doesn't mean that they're perfect, right? and as an analyst, I'm always going to find things to be upset about, but they're just a much more prepared team. And that's the one thing I've said about, you look at Alabama and Clemson. The thing that partly makes those teams so good is, Clemson's not a team that just throws 5-stars out at every position. Tanner Muse isn't a 5-star player. Kendall Joseph isn't a 5-star player. But they're just so well coached that you have to beat them. If you want to win the game, you have to beat them. They're not going to hand you 5 turnovers. They're not just going to play sloppy football and have 7 false starts. You're going to have to beat them. And Notre Dame is finally becoming that kind of team where they're just not going to beat themselves. You have to actually outplay them. And that, to me, is why they've had so much more success this season than they had last season, even though last season they were a more dynamic team with some of the first-round kind of talent that they had on that squad.
I have to interject here to say that I'm embarrassed because you know a hell of a lot more about Clemson than I know about Notre Dame. So you've done your homework.
Well, that's part of my job. But But look, when you're looking at a team like Notre Dame, and you say, well, who do they want to be? They want to be an elite program. So you say, well, who are the elite programs? It's them. And so you study those teams and you say, hey, so what are they doing that makes them win? And it's easy and I think lazy to say, well, Clemson wins because they've got such better players. I would argue, and I said this in our show today, if you look at the back 7 of Clemson's 2015 defense, I would argue it's better than the back 7 of your defense now. When you look at the linebackers you had, when you look at the corners, Mackenzie Alexander, Javon Curse, TJ Green at safety, you're better up front, no question. But it's not just that you have better players than everybody else. It's that the Clemson kids know how to play. And I don't think Clemson and Alabama get enough credit. I think a lot of teams in sort of a jealousy thing say, oh, well, they win because they have better players than everybody else. You're telling me Clemson in 2016 had 31-0 better players than Ohio State? No. They were coached better. They played better. And that's what has made those two teams stand above everyone else. And so I've spent time studying those teams, say, hey, what do they do that Notre Dame's not doing besides just having better players that's going to allow Notre Dame? And so then when I evaluate Notre Dame, I can say, okay, here's why I think Notre Dame's an elite, getting to that, if I were to say they were an elite team, or here's where they stand amongst the elite, you have to have somebody to compare them to, right? And so that's why I have sort of done my homework on teams like Alabama and Clemson, because their programs I have a tremendous amount of respect for, because that's where Notre Dame is trying to get to.
It's interesting you mentioned the back end of that 15 defense being more talented than this one. The only issue was late in that season, a couple of those players you mentioned, and I'm not naming names, they started thinking a little more about the next level and protecting themselves, and that really sort of hits to what you're talking about in a way, because this year's back end might not be as talented as that one, but these guys, and I could be wrong here, I don't think I will be, I mean, they're giving 100% toward, I mean, they're fighting till the end, and it's
they're bought in.
Exactly, they're bought in, and they would never consider letting their minds wander, I guess, like a few of the guys on the 15 defense did. But it just goes to show that you can have everything going right, but a few variables going the other way can cost you a championship. I mean, I know that the coaches believe that that was the first national championship against Alabama, where voila, the back end of their defense was the fundamental breakdown in losing that game.
Yeah, because it's not about talent. That's what I keep telling. It's not just about talent. Look at Ohio State. You're telling me that Ohio State shouldn't have played for more national championships in 2014? The 2015, look, with all due respect to Clemson, I watched Clemson that year face to face. I mean, I was in that stadium. I watched them play. Excellent team. And all the Notre Dame fans, if they had played on a dry field, that game would have looked a lot different. Right, because Deshaun Watson doesn't throw for 90 yards against a Brian Van Gorder-led defense on a dry field, okay? That game would have looked a lot different. Clemson was a better team than Notre Dame that year. But I also watched Ohio State face-to-face, and the talent level between those two teams wasn't even close. I mean, Ohio State was so much more talented than everybody else. Why didn't they play for national championship? For the same reason that you mentioned some of the issues at Clemson, and we're seeing that at Ohio State now. Guys that are worried about their futures. It's okay to worry about your future, but you have to do that within the concept of team. And I think that's where Clemson has grown. And it goes back to 2016 because I don't think that 2016 team in some spots was quite as talented as the team the year before. Getting Mike Williams back helped, but I think defensively, I don't know if it was as good as the previous year's team. But it was a better unit. They, like you said, they played together. There weren't the mental breakdowns. You had to start beating them. And that's really when Clemson went from a talented team that just couldn't quite get it done to an elite team. Not an elite talent team, because I think we could maybe have a discussion of whether or not. I mean, the NFL draft tells me that Ohio State was every bit as talented, if not more so, than Clemson was in 2016. But Clemson was a far superior team than Ohio State for all the other things that I've mentioned before about what I respect. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? Like, I mean, you have to build to that. It didn't happen overnight at Alabama. Remember when they quit against Utah in the Sugar Bowl, right? And they didn't want to be there, and they had guys worried about the NFL. It happens everywhere. The great coaches are the ones that can fix that and get the program on track and get guys like Christian Wilkins to say, yeah, you could be a first-round pick, but you're so invested in the team concept that you're willing to turn that down to come back for another run at a championship.
Business owners out there, if you own a business that accepts credit cards, you need to listen up. Tandem Payment, based right here in the upstate, run by Clemson folks, is changing the face of payment processing, quickly becoming the most cost-effective solution for all small businesses. Tandem's program saves you up to 90% on processing charges and gives your customers what they love most, choices. This is not some crazy introductory offer. Tandem's technology allows business owners to offset their credit card processing costs by applying a small customer service charge to each sale they make. If you want to know more, visit tandempayment.com today. Former Tiger Hot Rod McDowell works over there at Tandem Payment. They handle all their business and customer service face-to-face. So give them a call, 864-672-1570, if you're tired of spending an arm and a leg on all those credit card processing fees. Okay, so heading into this season, what was your opinion on the ceiling of Notre Dame this year?
You know, I predicted Notre Dame to go 10-2. And the thing that I said in our preview podcast about the season was, I can't tell you who can beat Notre Dame. There wasn't a team on the schedule you looked at and say, they're better than Notre Dame, they're better than Notre Dame, they're better than Notre Dame. But the reason I went 10-2 was because Notre Dame just hadn't done this before. Like, the 2012 year was an anomaly. It was not a tough schedule. They had some fluky games. And it was just one of those everything came together seasons. And I looked at this team and I said, you know, this team has the makings of a really good team, but I still had Miami in my head and Stanford in my head and Georgia in my head and 2016 in my head, to where I just wasn't willing to bite the bullet and say they're going to get it done. Because, look, going undefeated in college football is incredibly hard. I mean, you look at Clemson last year, 12-2, you know, 12-1 getting into the playoffs. And who'd they lose to? 4-8 Syracuse. 2016 national championship team beats Alabama, beats Ohio State 31-0. Who beat them? Flipping Pitt, who went 8-5. You know what I mean? Like, it is hard to get on the field every week and win every game. And, you know, so did I see 12-0 coming? No. But I did predict Notre Dame to have a shot at the playoff. I actually did predict them to be in the playoffs. This year went the complete opposite of what I thought it was going to do. I looked at a lot of parity in college football this year, and I thought there'd be multiple 2-loss league champs. And so that's when I thought Notre Dame was going to have a shot to get in, even though I predicted an 11-1, 10-2 season. I did not see 3 undefeated teams coming. I really didn't. I think there was parity, but I think a couple teams kind of rose above that and used that parity to be able to put together records that maybe in most years I don't think they necessarily would have had.
At what point did you look at this Irish team and say this could be a special team?
When they beat Stanford. And it's not that Stanford's a great team. Stanford's a good team. They're 8-4. But Stanford's owned Notre Dame. I mean, just own Notre Dame. There's been teams where you're like, how the heck did they lose to that Stanford team? Because Stanford hasn't been the Andrew Luck version of Stanford in a while, right? And so when Notre Dame lost to Stanford in 2010 and 2011, you're like, yeah, okay, Kelly's in year 1 and 2, and they got Andrew Luck. They haven't been that team in a while. They haven't been as talented as their results have been. And it's just like every year, 2015, they had a fourth quarter lead and blew it. 2016, they had a fourth quarter lead and blew it. 2017, they had a fourth quarter lead and blew it. They just weren't mentally tough enough to beat Stanford. So not only did they beat Stanford, but the fact that they dominated Stanford in the second half said to me, okay, there's something a little bit different about this team. This team isn't going to fold late in the game. This team is actually going to take the late game situation and say, we own this moment. And that's when I really first started to believe that this team has a chance to be special. Is because they slayed that dragon that had really held them down. And the same thing happened in 2012. When they beat Stanford in 2012, you just knew that team was going to keep winning. Because that was – so to set the stage a little bit, in 2012, Notre Dame hadn't beaten Stanford since 2008. So the current seniors on that team had never beaten Stanford. Well, the same thing is true of the current senior class at Notre Dame. They hadn't beaten Stanford since 2014. So other than Drew Tranquill, there wasn't a player on Notre Dame's team that actually beaten Stanford. So they didn't. It was that mental block. And so when they went out there and physically beat Stanford up in every phase of the game, you said, okay, this team is different. And they just played with such confidence after that to where every time they took the field, it was like you just felt like they were going to win that game because they were going to find a way to do it. And that's new for Notre Dame. That's not – usually it was, okay, how are they going to screw this one up? This team was the complete opposite of that.
All right, so we got Tua/Jalen. We got Kyler Murray. We got Trevor Lawrence and Ian Book, playoff quarterbacks. Does Ian Book belong, in your opinion, in that category?
From a talent standpoint, no. I mean, he's not in the same league as those guys when you look at tools. He doesn't have Trevor Lawrence's size and arm strength. I mean, Trevor Lawrence throws him and Dwayne Haskins throw as pretty of a ball as you're going to see in anybody in college football. Tua's the gunslinger and the elite player, and Kyler Murray's just a freak of nature. If he was 3 inches taller, I mean, he might be one of the best prospects of all time if he had the size to match the other tools. What Ian Book has done is gotten everything out of his ability, number one, but he allows Chip Long to run the offense the way that he wants to run the offense. And he allows this team to be very much a balanced football team. And I don't mean balanced run just run versus pass. I mean balanced meaning no matter what you do, they're going to find an answer, right? And so for Northwestern, for example, Northwestern had a game plan that said we're not going to let Notre Dame run the ball, and we're going to take Miles Boykin, their leading receiver, out of the game. So Chase Claypool goes off. And Michael Young, who had caught like 2 balls all year, catches a 47-yard touchdown. Chris Fink has money plays, right? And somebody else steps up. You look at the USC game. USC said, we're going to play press against your big receivers on the outside. We're going to blitz you up the middle, and we're not going to give you time to throw those back shoulders and those kind of throws. And so what happens, Chris Fink catches 7 balls for 86 yards in the first half and puts the team on his shoulders. And that happens because Ian Book is going to get the ball where the defense isn't, sort of thing. And that's what he's been really good about. And the other thing I like about Ian is he's one of those kids that when he screws up, it almost like it makes him better. You look at him against Pitt, and he threw 2 interceptions in the game. And his second interception was just bad. They're down 14-6. And he's got a receiver open for a post route that should have been a touchdown, but he waits too long to throw the ball, gets hit, flares up, and catches the ball. He went 10 of 10 the rest of the game and threw a game-winning touchdown pass after that interception. Like, it was like that interception kind of like pissed him off a little bit, if I'm allowed to say that on your show. And he just dominated after that, and we saw the same thing throughout the season. And he makes a terrible interception against Virginia Tech, and just comes back and annihilates them. Something like 19 of 21 the rest of the way, or something absurd like that. And that moxie is what allows him to play that way, and allows him to get the ball out to a group of playmakers that I think are a lot more talented than a lot of the folks in the national media want to give him credit for.
All right, so I'm very early into my study of Notre Dame, and so I've watched the last two games first, USC and Syracuse. If I were in a bar in South Bend and I said, I don't know about Notre Dame's team speed on offense, would I get slapped in the face?
No, you wouldn't get slapped in the face. I think that that's a legitimate issue. But again, I think what I would push back against is sometimes I think people obsess over speed too much because they just look at like Will Fuller speed, right? Or Mike Williams speed, just that take the top off the defense speed. But I look at speed as a relative thing. Number one, Dexter Williams is a home run threat every time he touches the ball. Is he as fast as Travis Etienne? I don't think so. Etienne? I don't think so. But the kid's averaged about 7.5 yards to carry the last 2 years, right? And you watch the USC game and you watch the Syracuse game and you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? That cat's pulling away from Florida State's defense. Now, Florida State's not good on defense, but they can run, right? And he's pulling away from them. Did the same thing to USC's speed on defense. And so he's a big play guy. But, you know, when I look at Miles Boykin, you say, is he fast? Well, he's not fast in that he wouldn't beat T. Higgins in a race, but he's 6'4", 230 pounds. And he can run for that size. And a guy like that doesn't have to be 3 steps open. He just needs to have a half a step open, and then Ian Book can put that ball up and let him use his go-gadget arms to make a play. So, you know, I think there's different ways to be successful in offense. One way is to be really fast. The other way is to play fast and to play big. And the thing about Notre Dame is they're going to have a 6'5" tight end who was just named the second-team All-American. I had not sure if I completely think he has quite had that kind of season. They have a 6'4.5", 227-pound athlete in Chase Claypool, who's a very good athlete. 6'4", 227-pound Miles Boykin on the other side. And then when they go 2 tight ends, they bring in 6'5.5", 260-pound Cole Kmet. So are those guys going to run by you? No, but they don't have to. And that's the thing. Every week you see this when we do these conversations, they don't have speed, and yet somehow they're throwing the ball down the field successfully. And just because, like I said, there's more than just running really fast that allows you to be an effective big play receiver on football, on offense. So the not speed thing is accurate to me when talking about the Notre Dame offense, where I think you would get slapped. I would hope no one would slap you, but if we're doing that, it would be if you were to say that Notre Dame lacks speed on defense. That's the biggest misconception that people have. This Notre Dame defense is one of the most athletic defenses in the country, and it starts up front.
I mean, yeah, that Syracuse game, a lot of people look at that game and they say, oh, well, Eric Dungy was hurt. Well, they were dominating that game well before he left.
Yeah, he was 1 of 4 with an interception and was getting his brains beat in before he got hurt. I mean, it was already 10-0 before he got knocked out of the game. They were harassing him from jump in that game.
So obviously the recipe for Notre Dame to hang with Clemson and win is to lean on that defense. But offensively, what do you think they have to score? I don't know. I don't want to be too simplistic, but how do you think? I mean, you've studied Clemson plenty, obviously. Do you think there's a lot of misdirection, which it seems to me in my brief viewing of Notre Dame that Chip Long does a really good job of in freeing guys? Do you think that's sort of the prescription for, I guess, confusing Clemson's linebackers and safeties?
You know, I don't think it's about us confusing them as much as it's putting them in bind. And I think one thing that Chip Long does a really good job of is he's really good at using his personnel to put you in a bind, to say, okay, we're going to line up this way, and if you do this, then we're perfectly fine doing that. And that's, to me, what it does. He's good at getting into matchups. Okay, so, for example, in the Northwestern game, I mentioned how Northwestern had a game plan to take Miles Boykin out of the game. Right, Miles Boykin's their leading receiver. He's a big kid, plays into the boundary. So what he did is he put Miles Boykin in the slot and ran him on a route where he got isolated against the safety, and guess what? Touchdown pass, right? And so he's really good at using his personnel to say, hey, we know we can't just run right at you, right? We're not going to just run for 250 yards because we're going to blow Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence and Niles Pinckney and Albert Huggins off the ball. And, oh, by the way, Trey Lamar, we're not worried about him, right? That's not the game plan, right? But they're going to run it enough between the tackles and then mix up some of those. And I don't know if counters are great because I watched the Texas A&M game and Texas A&M tried to run some of those counters and the ends just blew them up snap after snap after snap. But some of the misdirection runs that allow Dexter Williams to get in space and things like that, they're going to mix those up enough to kind of keep Clemson to say, well, you can't just vacate the box and take us outside because then we are good enough up front to hurt you inside. But we also know that we're not going to be able to completely get you to stack the box to where we can beat you outside. And that's, to me, what has made Chip Long so good is he can play that chess match that's going to allow him to be successful. And I do think his experience against Michigan and USC is going to help a little bit against Brent Venables. Now, it's a different system, but it's that aggressive, we're going to bring pressure from all over type of system that Notre Dame has faced before. Now, Clemson has players, I think, in spots that are better than some of the teams that they've played. But look, Notre Dame played Florida State's defensive line and ran for 365 yards. They went against Michigan's defensive line and vaunted defense and had success. So it's not that they have. I'm not saying that those teams are as good as Clemson, but this isn't the first time Notre Dame has had to face that type of problem where they've had to use their personnel to take advantage.
Is it too early for me to ask you how you see this game going?
Yeah, I'd say a little bit. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot better game than people think. I think that Notre Dame is a lot better than people think it is. I think Clemson, and I'll tell you why I think that. Okay, I got kind of tired of hearing this mantra of how somehow a 2-loss Georgia team that lost by 20 to LSU was one of the 4 best teams because Kirk Herbstreit's eyes told him that they were, right? So I did some research, and I said, okay, so how do these teams do against the best teams on their schedule? Because a lot of people want to point against Notre Dame and say, well, they barely beat Ball State and they barely beat, Vanderbilt. And my response is, I said this on a show in Ohio earlier, and I said, what would Ohio State have done against Maryland or Michigan if you took Dwayne Haskins and J.K. Dobbins off the field? And they lost, is what the response was. Well, Notre Dame didn't have Ian Book or Dexter Williams in either one of those games, right? Like, how would Clemson have looked against Boston College or Syracuse? Well, we kind of learned about Syracuse with Trevor Lawrence going down, but what if they also lost Travis Etienne in that game, or Etienne in that game? Well, that's how Notre Dame had to face, Michigan and Boston College, Michigan and Ball State and Vanderbilt. So I'd say, how do you perform in your biggest level? And you look at Clemson played 2 top 25 teams. They won those games by combined 6 points. Now, those are 2 darn good football teams. You look at what Notre Dame did against the 3 ranked teams they played, and I'm talking about teams that finished ranked, not like Virginia Tech, right? Like, I don't pump up how Notre Dame blew out a ranked team on the road because you and I both know Virginia Tech wasn't that good. Notre Dame had a 33-point win, a 10-point road win, and a 7-point win against their 3 ranked teams. If you look at the 6 teams on the schedule or that were in the conversation, so the 4 playoff teams plus Georgia and Georgia and Ohio State, and you look at how they did against teams that finished in the top 25 or received votes in the AP. Notre Dame, Alabama led all of them in margin of victory at 22.2. Notre Dame was next at 17.8. Clemson was at 13.3. Georgia was at 4.6. If you look at yardage difference, Notre Dame led everybody at 190. Alabama was right behind at 189.6. The next closest was Ohio State at 84. Clemson was at 81. If I go down here and I had some more data, in those 4 games for Clemson, their biggest yardage differential was 174 against NC State. Notre Dame's 3rd worst game was plus 215. So not only did Notre Dame beat very good football teams, they dominated those teams. And so I think that's where the misconception of Notre Dame comes in. People want to focus on the Pitt game or the Ball State game when you look at the entirety of this team. When Notre Dame had its biggest moment is when this team played its best. And I think that you're going to see a similar thing in this game. But they're also going against a team that is used to this spotlight as well. And that's an advantage Notre Dame often has because they play all over and they play in Yankee Stadium and Fenway Park or these other places. They don't play a lot of teams that are prepared for the moment like Notre Dame is. That's not going to be true of Clemson. And so that's why I think this is going to be a tremendous game because you have two very talented teams that play good, sound, fundamental football, that are coached very well, that have the supreme confidence in their deservedness to be here. And I think that's what's going to make this really just an outstanding football game.
Yeah, it's funny. In the last 3 games, Clemson has put up a lot of points. But if you take out the South Carolina game, which, South Carolina's defense is just terrible, against Duke and Pitt in the first half, so 60 total minutes of football, Clemson has 11 punts, 17 first downs, 2 of 14 on third down conversions. So they're not exactly as running as efficiently as they want to right now.
Well, the interesting thing about that is I watch Clemson and Notre Dame. It's really funny because there's a lot of similarities between these two teams. Like, what's the best part of both of these teams? Defensive line, right? What's the best part of both offenses? Dynamic, explosive running back, right? Ian Book's another guy. If you look at his first half numbers compared to his second half numbers, it's night and day because he's a young quarterback. I mean, he's got about the same number of starts as Trevor Lawrence has. And young guys, a lot of the stuff they're seeing for the first time. And so when teams throw these different looks and different wrinkles, because the thing about Clemson and Notre Dame is every team they play knows we're not as good as them. So we just can't line up in our base defense and say, hey, we're just going to stop you because we're that good. They're going to throw wrinkles that you haven't seen yet. They're going to throw looks that you haven't seen yet and bring pressures that you aren't prepared for. And that's, I think, part of the reason why Clemson has had some first-half struggles. It's why Notre Dame at times has had some first-half struggles. But they're smart, heady quarterbacks that are coached well. So when you finally get a read on it, say, okay, we know what you're doing now. Now we're going to turn it loose. That's why you see Clemson put teams away in the second half. And that's why you see Notre Dame start to really put teams away in the second half is because of that. They get a lot of stuff thrown at them. And when you're a young quarterback, the first time a team starts to use a heavy double inside stunt with their Mike and their Buck linebacker, I haven't seen that before. We didn't practice that. But if it's a smart kid, which Trevor Lawrence is, I think, and what Ian Book is, it doesn't take you long to eventually figure it out, and you're not going to keep a team like that down for 4 quarters. And that's been true of Clemson all year, and that's been true of Notre Dame all year.
Bryan Driskell, boy, your knowledge of Clemson is impressive. I know that the listeners are going to really appreciate it, and I'm assuming you're planning on going down to Jerry World?
I will be down in Jerry World, yes. Looking forward to having some nice Dallas barbecue on down there, no question about it.
Well, I owe you a beer in the hospitality room. How's that?
Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Thanks a lot, man. Let us know if there's ever anything we can do for you.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Bryan. All right, that was fun. Thank you to Bryan Driskell for sharing his time with us. We might check back in with him as we get closer to the game on December 29th. Maybe when we're down in Dallas, might have either Bryan or some other Notre Dame observer to try to give us a little more insight. So thanks so much to him. Thank you to our title sponsor, Parham Smith, an Archenhold law firm in downtown Greenville. If you haven't gotten one of the Clemson Dubcast koozies that they've been distributing, you need to go by there and try to get you one. Also, the Abernathy Boutique Hotel. Thanks to them for sponsoring the podcast. And finally, last, certainly not least, Tandem Payment in Greenville. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making this happen. Couldn't do it without them. Most of all, thank you to you all for making this a regular part of your podcast listening routine. Have a great weekend, everyone. And we will have the next podcast as normal, dropping Monday morning. Cheers.